So we thought we would get started because we have a lot of work that we want you all to do tonight. It would be helpful if we had as much time as we possibly can. Thank you to the library for having us tonight, and thank you to everybody who got the word out to get this great crowd of people here, and thank you everybody who came out tonight to talk about this very important topic. So my name is Karen Richards. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Human Rights Commission, and
my name is David Scherr. I'm an Assistant Attorney General and Co-Chief of the Community Justice Division in the Attorney General's Office. Last name is Scherr.
So what I wanted to do first was give you a little bit of background on where this is coming from, where we've been, and where we hope that we're going. And then if there's questions from folks, we'd be happy to answer those. And then we're going to get right into having you help us out with how we can move this topic forward. So Act 54, which passed the legislature in the last legislative session, requires the Attorney General and the Human Rights Commission, along with interested stakeholders, which is all of you, to develop a strategy to address racial disparities in state systems of education, labor and employment, access to housing and health care, and economic development. So tonight we're going to solve all those problems, right? Not. But we are going to start a conversation about how the state can begin to address these. So the report was originally due on November 1st, and we got an extension until December 15th so that we could gather some more public input through these forums. And I just lost my notes. So the first forum that we held was on September 28th, and it was a public forum, but invitations were also sent out to stakeholders, a lot of whom were in entities of state government. And the reason for that is because we're supposed to be looking at disparities across state systems. And so we need the stakeholders from those agencies to be at the table to have these discussions with us, because if we want them to do something, it's great if they hear what it is that we want them to do, right? So that, there were also groups, various affinity groups represented there and individuals from the community. We broke into groups around each of the issues that I just read off, and people had a discussion around what kind of data do we already have, what kind of data do we need to collect, what are the issues that we see that need to be addressed, and just some thoughts around what were the causes of some of those disparities that we were seeing. So tonight what we want to do is take a deeper dive into that information. So what I've done is I've captured on sheets around the room with one of the topic areas for each of the topics, some of the items that came out of that last meeting that people identified as possible areas where racial disparities exist. What we're really trying to find, if possible, is disparities that would be able to be captured in some sort of data point, because if we want to figure out if we're making a difference, right, we want to have a baseline data point, and then we want to be able to look and see whether we're moving that data point. So as you think about what kinds of things you would like us to focus on, keep in mind that if it has a data point or data that could be gathered, that's a much easier thing for us to try to analyze. So what we're going to do is have you go around first and add to these lists anything else that you can think of that might be something that we should be looking at or thinking about within each of the identified areas. And then if you can get to more than one, go to the one that you're most interested in, but if you can get to more than one, go and add whatever you would like to add. And then once we get done with that process, what we'll do is have you go back around and sort of look at each one and with a check mark vote as to which thing you think is the most important thing within that category, which is not to say that we're not going to look at anything else within that, but just we want to get a sense of, are there one or two things that people think would really help to move the ball forward that we could really focus some energy on initially, knowing that we've got a lot of work ahead of us to really move the ball completely. And then what we'll do is take a quick break, and we will take from each sheet the most voted upon item, and then we will do a second exercise where we try to do an even deeper dive into that item. So that's the idea for tonight. It's going to be a matter of keeping moving as we go through each of these tasks. So I'm going to set my timer on my cell phone, and when you hear the ringy ding ding, whatever it is, then it'll be time to move to the next task, and I will cue you to do that. All right?
I just wanted to add one thing real quick. This all comes from a piece of legislation called Act 54 that was passed by the legislature this last year. Karen mentioned that at the beginning of her presentation. And we are lucky to have here today Representative Kaya Morris. I just wanted to give her a shout out and give her credit. Kaya Morris from Bennington. She was the key drafter, especially behind this piece that we're working on tonight. So thanks to Kaya, and thanks to all of you for being here tonight. Really appreciate you taking the time to work on this.
Thanks, David. Okay, so any questions that people have? Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. And I just want to add a little bit more context that there's many of us in this room that last year after the election were devastated and enlightened to do something. And we actually had an emergency civil rights forum early December. And some of what actually got into the bill were things that a group of people, many of them here in this room, were part of, at least the genesis, certainly not the final product. So I just want you to know that there's a lot of energy and fear and worry, and there's a lot of us that have been working on these issues for quite some time. So I just want to give that broader context.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to have you all come here, is because we know there's a lot of collective energy, there's a lot of collective knowledge, and we need to be able to get that knowledge and energy to feed into the change, that if we're going to make change at state government. And I'm hoping that what comes out of this is a process in which those of you who want to be engaged with working at even an agency level to inform and help to make changes, that can be part of what this is, because having people in state government try to fix this without input from affected people, to me, makes no sense. So I think that we need to figure out how that can happen, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm John Boomerding. In the 90s, I organized the first state-driven restorative justice programs in this county. I have a question with these idea sheets. Why isn't there one for the criminal justice system? Because this is really something that we need to address directly. When I was working in the system, I saw dynamics of disproportionate sentencing, profiling, disproportionate enforcement, or that's my question. I have some things I want to see on that list too.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you asked the question, because we should have. It was partly on us to explain more clearly the structure of what's going on here. So, as we mentioned, this chunk that we're working on is part of this law called Act 54, and a really big chunk of that law is actually, I should say, the name of the law is the Racial Disparities in Criminal and Juvenile Justice Advisory Panel. So the name of the law is actually speaking to one of the biggest chunks of the law, which is a panel that the legislature set up to look into exactly the issues that you're talking about. In doing that, many legislators also recognized that they needed to look at other systems too. And so that's why this other piece of the law came in that we are working on here tonight. But that's why what we're working on here tonight doesn't include some of those issues we're talking about, because this other panel is in existence and really focusing on criminal and juvenile justice systems in particular. And I can get you some information on when that panel is meeting. It's generally meeting the second Tuesday of every month, although in December it's going to meet the first Tuesday. And I don't remember what location they've selected, but I can certainly get that to you. I can check on that and get that to you. But so you're great that you asked that. You're absolutely right that that's an essential piece of what we need to be working on, and that is a separate chunk of work that's being done by this other panel.
Okay, let's get to work. On the table are different ones. So economic development is here. The other topics are over there. They are, again, for your edification: education, housing, healthcare, labor and employment, and economic development is here. Okay, and there are pens at each one, and please add any ideas that you have. We would love to have them. Thanks. So go. Just to move from station to station, read through what's there, and vote for, put a check mark on or next to the thing that you think is the most important item within that area. Yes, in each area. Yes. That had the most votes onto another sheet of paper, and then we will talk to you about what we're going to do next. All right? So 5 minutes, 10 minutes or so to chat and use the bathroom or whatever you want to do. Hey, thank you for your patience. Y'all kind of ended up in some of the areas getting tie votes on some, so some of the topics actually have more than one. So I'm going to walk you through the education one just so you can get a sense of what you're going to be doing next, and it'll be, again, go to the main topic that you're interested in, and if you have time, you can scoot around to other ones. But the idea here is that there's a couple of performance measures, but it's basically what's the issue that you think needs to be addressed. So education, the two tied were retention and hiring, or the other way around, of educators of color, and non-representative curriculum or non-culturally responsive curriculum. Okay, so those were the two items that were identified. So what I then want you to do is talk about what's the story behind that. What are the kind of causes of that? What do you think? Why do you think we have this problem? Okay, and I've given you a 1 and a 2, so you can kind of do it for each one. And then who are partners that could help us address this? Who needs to be at the table to help us basically change the dynamic here? And what are 3 or 4 ideas for how we might change that? All right, and they can be off the wall. They can be low cost. No cost is always good with state government, I'll tell you right now. But don't let that stop you. If what's that, Sheila? Yes, it's not just with. So 3 to 4 good ideas, and you can put more if you have them, about what might work to address that topic. And I'm going to give you, I think, let's see, what time is it? 6:30. Probably 20 minutes to a half an hour. So you can really spend some time thinking about it and talking about it with the group of people that are in your topic area, and try to come up with some great ideas for us. And then we'll come back together and talk some more. Okay? Questions? The same process for each one, and they're spread around the room like they were before. They're probably not in the same place. Pick one to focus on. You don't have to. If you put in your 2 cents and move on if you want to. Yeah. Yep. Yes.
They're asking that this be done as a group rather than as individual.
Right. Yeah. So talk amongst yourselves, capture some ideas on the paper, because this is what we're going to have for our takeaway. So we want to capture whatever your thoughts are. Okay. Yeah.
To the kind of process. I think at this point we are supposed to kind of stay in our clusters in order to get to the sense of the discussion, because we have to actually arrive at a conclusion. So
Right.
And we don't want to leave it up to the one person who's still standing at the table.
And may I suggest that each group appoint a scribe? Or you're not going to be able to?
Okay, yeah, okay. So the suggestion's been made for each group to write on the paper, okay? And Representative Morris indicated that it might be there's a robust discussion opposed to just bouncing around, but if you're a kind of person that needs to bounce around, bounce.
I don't want to get ahead of you process-wise, but if I were to choose, I would like you to tell us what each of the topics are, so I can go straight to the one that...
Okay, all right. So education we'll put on this table here, okay? And over here is housing. Here is labor and employment. Here is healthcare. And there is economic development. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so for housing, it's, again, 2, not enough affordable housing and discrimination by private landlords. For labor and employment, it's the need to address specific aspects of white culture / privilege that create environments that are unwelcoming to people of color. Economic development, again, there's 2, need to expand recruitment efforts and lack of businesses owned by people of color. And for healthcare, it's relationships between racism and health-related issues. So I just rang my bell. So, well, probably you couldn't hear it, but finish up what you're doing, get your last thoughts, and then pick somebody from your group who can present out some of the things that you talked about, okay? Can be your scribe or someone else. So it sounded to me like there were a lot of great conversations going on, and I'm really excited to hear what you all came up with. So just for a point of process, what I'm going to have you do is one person from your group come up and sort of go over, you don't have to go over the whole thing, but some of the highlights of your discussion. So that you can inform the rest of the group about what you talked about. And then our intention is to capture this information ultimately in some manner in the report that we write to the legislature. So I'm not sure what that report's going to look like yet. I have kind of an idea in my head, but we will capture the information that you all have worked so hard to share tonight. So what group wants to start? Education.
All right, so our 2 performance measures were retention and hiring of educators of color and non-representative curriculum / not culturally sensitive curriculum. The story behind it, essentially, the phrase to sum it up was white supremacy, which we then kind of broke down into unconscious bias in hiring and school practices, just overall whiteness of the school staff and community, both implicit and explicit discrimination, unwillingness to recognize and address issues of racism, and then people making the decisions in general are white folks. And that was mostly for retention and hiring. So then for the curriculum section, failure to train teachers to provide such curriculum, lack of diversity of staff, assumption that diverse curriculum is only important to students of color, just teaching about struggles of race, not kind of a broader spectrum, just focusing on like enslavement or civil rights. Teachers' fears and discomfort in leading discussions connected to racism, and then prepackaged curriculum that doesn't really allow space for or doesn't include social justice topics. Some partners, back to number 1, that might be able to help change the situation: the Vermont Agency of Education, the AOE, superintendents, school boards, administrators, social justice teaching programs such as the Spark program, national institutions, educators of color and community members of color in the local area, and then some similar folks over here connected to curriculum, as well as people that provide resources around representative curriculum, and some ideas of what might work. State could pay or forgive loans for people of color to get trained as teachers and then teach in Vermont in a public school for a certain number of years, or partner with teacher training programs to provide that in some way. Training staff about whiteness and white supremacy could go in both categories. Explicitly recruiting educators of color, and having the AOE mandate certain elements of culturally responsive or social justice curriculum. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to grab one. Housing.
So the baseline was not enough quality, affordable housing, and discrimination by private landlords. People of color are not well represented, and landowners are a major problem in that. The story behind the baseline is the cap on subsidized housing is too low. Gentrification is a significant problem. Housing prices are artificially inflated. Subsidies for the utilities are too low, not affordable. Racism, limited economic opportunity, access to housing. More people of color are incarcerated, and that limits people's access to public housing. People who can help change it are all levels of government and the media getting the word out, giving interviews, providing a platform to the public. Landlord networks and activists. In this area, I guess there's a landlord breakfast I just learned about. Advocates for housing and activist organizations, people that are actively working to dismantle racism and poverty. Best ideas, what works is, I can't read it from there, is to engage media and inform public about the lack of affordable housing and discriminatory white landlords. To hire or appoint a housing ombudsman. If you guys don't know what that is, a healthcare ombudsman, you can call them when you're having trouble with your healthcare, and they will work it out with Medicaid. They're an advocate for you, and they're at the state level. So a housing ombudsman would be the same. Incentives to lower rental costs that could include a system for advocates to accompany folks in housing search. And I don't see it here, but I thought we also said including what you'd have to do if you get that incentive to meet it. Also a system for rating landlords, like a Yelp for housing, that will reveal racist practices, racism in landlords and landowners. Federal funding could be tied to the Yelp housing review. And legislative fix for everything in the story. Because there were some things that we couldn't figure out, something without a legislative fix that could help.
Okay, labor and employment.
So for labor and employment, the performance measure baseline need to address specific aspects of white culture / privilege that create environments unwelcoming to people of color. The story behind that is, oh my goodness, discerning what is skill versus what is culture, awareness of employers, awareness of persons applying, people perpetuating microaggressions and bigger problems connected to racism within work environments, questions of how to efficiently train white people handling challenges related to race when they come up. So there's definitely a big history in Vermont that kind of led to white culture and lots of privilege specifically within this state. And so thinking about how that plays out a lot in a different workspaces. Different partners, so definitely looking at trying to provide training, and there's some listed organizations and spaces that we know in Brattleboro, Vermont, that can be compensated in order to be used as resources in that, as well as, I'm sure, many organizations within the state. Employers are definitely a big member of this, of looking at how human resources and people in leadership need to be a part of the solution. And looking at service agencies, direct service one-on-one assistance in terms of supporting people, and the Department of Labor, community colleges, people that are supporting individuals going into the workforce, as well as kind of meeting them once they're there and training beforehand. Looking at 3 to 4 best ideas, what works. So we already labeled the training as something that's important to look at examining racism, white privilege, and really understanding how that comes into play, that raising that awareness and being able to take action. Starting early, looking at, this kind of connects to what we already heard about within the education realm, but looking at schools and creating environments with staff there that are already welcoming before people enter into the workforce. Training governmental leaders, looking at for them as role models in terms of investing time and money into doing the training, as well as kind of walking the talk and following through with what their training tells them to do. Skills-based, so looking at when we're seeking employment, not focusing on skills or credentials or level of education, but looking at do they have the experience and the kind of time spent with the people they're looking at serving, and disciplining officials, so looking at how do we react and trying to find the right ways to hold people accountable when they do something wrong, and having those systems in place. Does that generally make sense?
Okay, healthcare.
All right. So ours was performance measure baseline was the relationship between racism and health-related issues. So the story behind that is a wide range involving lack of language services, the inability for providers to identify issue-specific problems among health and racism, the recognition of racial discrimination as an actual health measure, and connecting that to any stress-related health outcome, obesity, asthma, infant mortality, depression, chronic stress, recognition of racism affecting the health of the entire community rather than just pockets among communities. Treatment different along racial lines, so pain management was an example. So when a white person goes in, they're likely going to get their pain pills, whereas when black people go in, they're med seeking. The connection of their trust in their providers and whether or not they will follow through with recommendations that their provider gives them, as well as this idea that health is a outcome of individualized behavior rather than a product of society. So who can we bring to the table? We talked about a researcher at Morehouse in Atlanta. Her name is Dr. Kamara Jones, and looking at that type of research she does, she looks at racism as a foundation to physical health outcomes. Am I getting that right? Wonderful. And then looking among that academic community of who is actually looking into this issue at the academic level, bringing in organizations such as Equity Solutions, which provides training to providers and all of that. Sheila, am I getting that right? Good, just making sure. And then bringing in, the actual academic community, the medical schools, the people that train future doctors, future social workers, future psychologists, and also the research universities bringing in the PhDs, the EDDs, all those people as well. So we had 5 ideas rather than 3 or 4. So the first is to bring the need for POC trauma-informed clinicians and getting them to recognize things, adverse childhood experiences and all of that. Then also the recruitment and retention of POC providers. So, it's good to bring in the people, but you need to keep them on board and keep them employed at your organization. Trainings on impact of racism in health, ongoing. One idea we came up with is doctors and social workers and all those people need to do continuing education and mandating a certain amount of continuing education on racism, diversity, discrimination, all those issues. Then we talked about grants for research on racism and how racism is addressed among professionals. as well as language access and health outcomes in Vermont, and then actually taking all that knowledge and applying it to your practice. Yeah, I got that all right for my group.
Okay, and last but not least, economic development.
We had a small group, so I will rely on the members of our group also to comment. But we had two different, this is economic development. We had two different, but very linked measures that we were addressing. The first one was initially stated as need to expand recruitment efforts. And we really felt that that was way too narrow. We weren't just talking about, oh, a job is posted. Now, how are we going to make sure we get a diverse group of applicants? We expanded it to marketing efforts. So, need to expand marketing efforts in our state. And basically, when we say marketing efforts, we're talking about business development. Second measure is the lack of businesses. So I'll kind of combine these as well as I can. The story for the marketing efforts is really, if you look at it initially, it's employers just falling back on what they always have done and what they are seeing as the MO that is most comfortable to them. And a lot of that is nepotism. Markets are very narrowly defined. People relate to who they're comfortable with. There's also, in terms of job training, a real lack of diversity and not an effort of those that are doing the training, that are in the universities or the job training pools, of really trying to make sure their participants are from diverse backgrounds. Lack of emphasis on markets of communities of color. And this is where I'd like to kind of move over so I'm not just going into different lines here. But when we're talking about people of color and the entrepreneurs that now exist in Vermont, there's a much higher percentage if you take every 100 entrepreneurs, group of entrepreneurs, there's a much higher percentage of those that are people of color. It's really, from the data that we know, that comes from our commerce data, 14 out of every 100 white entrepreneurs are out of every 100 white adults, 14 are white entrepreneurs. If you were to study the people of color in the state of Vermont, it's 23. So there's a real contrast there that exists right now. So the point is how to expand that number of people of color who are entrepreneurs in our state. And it's also really important to remember how much is being spent on tourism and seeing that that's an avenue, a market for people becoming entrepreneurs and moving to the state or investing in the state with their business. So the partners, we can really combine here, of course, employers, colleges, universities, groups that promote internships, that see internships and on a paid basis as a value, and of course the State Department to all this work, whether it's Department of Labor, Agency of Education, Commerce, the Vermont Partnership. And when we're looking at this whole thing of expanding marketing efforts, we're reaching out to, across the country, to national organizations that, whether they're leisure, whether they're professional organizations, whatever, that are, their main membership are people of color. In terms of best ideas, we really had, I think, a great list. So first of all, paid internships, seeing the opportunity for workers, new workers of color, students coming out of school, to experiment with, through an internship, with what a profession is like, and have that be on a paid basis. to make sure that we get away from the silo effect that happens right now with these different state entities, so that AOE is working more with the Department of Commerce, that there are common, a joint planning that is taking place with community development, DOL. That an example of introducing businesses to expanded market development would be that ski resorts, for instance, reach out to leisure organizations that have a large percentage of people of color in their membership. And this was a great idea, I thought. The whole thing of going out and analyzing Black, Hispanic businesses across the country and think about what raw products they need to expand their business, and see if Vermont is already making those, whether it's wood or whether dairy, whatever, that they could then be invited and have a tour of the state and think about maybe accessing those raw products to expand what they're doing or to create products. And finally, we really made an emphasis on just mining data better and really better understanding the people of color that are in our state and the work that they're already doing and tapping them as resources. To think about marketing tools like every of color in the nation would have Vermont maple syrup replacing Aunt Jemima maple syrup on their breakfast table. Hosting more Vermont conferences with professional associations of people of color, and in general, just reaching out effectively to professional organizations across the country. Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. That was really a lot of work and a lot of important information that's going to be really helpful to us to capture going forward. So I think what I want to do, we've got about 10 minutes left so that we can honor your time tonight. One thing I would like to do is do a quick process, maybe in the last couple minutes, just on what worked tonight and what didn't work for you, so that you can give us a little bit of feedback, so that when we do this in Burlington the week after, no, next week, 28th, whenever that is. When we do this in Burlington on the 28th, we can be informed on how to improve it going forward. But what I would like to do now is just open up the floor to anybody who would like to make a general comment tonight about anything we've talked about the process, about what we should be, what we need to know to really do this right.
This isn't exactly what you asked for, but if you heard any good ideas tonight, take them out and implement them.
This was just a procedural thing. In between, after we went around and wrote, there was like 5 to 7 minutes where you guys were tallying, and I thought that actually would be a good time for us to maybe talk amongst ourselves about thoughts that came up in the process, or something about our own right privilege, or something where we can be using that time. And that was because otherwise I thought the meeting was really active and good in that way.
I want to say thank you for coming and really listening to the community. Just 2 suggestions. One is, I really think it's important, the comment that Julie made, just when you're sitting with a group of people, just allowing a few minutes of connectedness to set the context for that community in which you're doing the work. And the other thing I just want to say, as representatives of 2 really important systems, is that I feel like it's part of white culture to say, we'll do this if we can find the funding. And I think the ask and the essential need is that we recognize that the biggest barriers are always attitudinal. Like, if we all decide that this needs to happen, that these suggestions need to be implemented, that we will make that happen, that it's really not about whether the money is there. So I just wanted to say that into this room. Thank you.
appreciated your process, the two-step process in getting all of our input. And to me, it exists in a certain vacuum that's not mentioned. I did get here late, so I don't know if it wasn't mentioned. But that is the justice system, and our very bad record of 1 out of every 14 men being incarcerated, the highest state in the country. And Act 54 now is being revisited, and by December 14th, the Criminal Justice Training Council has a move to standardize so that all the municipalities have the same, there's less discretion, but it's moving backwards. They're recommending, for instance, that the local police can collaborate more and turn information over to ICE. And I'm very apprehensive that this isn't being discussed enough. I know this is, I talked with you as a break, it's not your purview, but I would like to see all of these things exist in the context of some real problems in our justice system and some possible backward steps that we're taking. So it sort of, to me, exists in that vacuum of not even mentioning it. I'm very concerned.
One of my thoughts is that it's really hard to get people out, especially people who are really marginalized. So one thing might be to have food or maybe have some kind of transportation. I don't know what Burlington's probably is bigger, so to have some kind of transportation to get folks from certain communities out. Because even here, I'm sure there are people who are limited by transportation who could not come. The other thing is that when I first looked at all these papers, I was really kind of stuck because my first thought is that racism impacts white folks too, and so does white supremacy. And so when we only focus on people of color sometimes, it's like, oh, poor them. But we can't all rise up unless we all rise up together. And so that is one of the challenges, and I don't know how to represent that in a report, but I think that is one of the challenges that we have here in the state, is that the lack of solidarity across the board.
I was really struck by the one entry on the first education sheet, which talked about how microaggressions disempower and disable people of color socially, in particular. That results in a social disability. And personally, I can relate on a certain level to the policy of housing, not allowing people with criminal records to be present in public housing. This is genocidal in intent. This has been shown in national studies. It deprives children from being with their fathers. And I can remember when my father left when I was 8 years old, and I was heartbroken and not mortally wounded, but deeply, deeply wounded. And I'm thinking of a little boy right now whose father has just been chased out of our town to Canada. And he is hurting really, really bad. We don't know how much harm we're doing unconsciously as white people. We're in a conspiracy. It's a tacit conspiracy, and we have to break through our intellectualizations about this. We have to reach deep, deep, deep inside ourselves to realize the harm that's being done and how awful it is.
Thank you for coming all the way down. I really appreciate it. I'm really glad that this has continued forward. I will say again that I get a little paranoid when I hear about a report's going to be written and submitted. So I really need this to keep going forward. And so, there's many people in the Brattleboro community, the Community Equity Collaborative that some of us are on, the Root Social Justice Center. We are your partners, and so we will do whatever we can to keep advancing this legislation, because as we're all saying, it's absolutely vital for all of us.
Hello. Okay. Yeah, to honor the original question, which was the feedback about the process, and I felt like it was really good. It allowed for us to have our voices heard and to really dig deep into issues of interest. And I would say the only thing that I would like to see is sort of for you to present resource or access of how we can stay involved in the conversation.
I'll be really quick. One thing just before I say the other thing is that would have been really helpful to have more black pens. That I was writing with the highlighter, and that was a deterrent as we were going through it. But on the good side, I would say that it's in and of itself, just having this meeting and looking around the room and remembering all the people in our community, and knowing there are others that are working together for this, and seeing you be here, in and of itself is a balm. So just thank you for doing it. It was really wonderful to see everybody. Balm in Gilead. Not the bomb. Right. Oh, right. Wrong. That's a generational thing. Sorry. I couldn't think of another one. Anyway, it was really great.
Any?
Just a process sort of suggestion. Is it on? Okay, great. Is to make a clear distinction between the labor and employment segment and economic development. One is sort of at the micro level, the other sort of at the macro level, sort of outwardly focusing. So I think that caused some sort of confusion in the economic development group, where one of the two pieces really dealt with which was actually covered quite well in the labor and employment group.
Unfortunately, I came in late, and so maybe I'm guessing that may happen in Burlington as well. So maybe just some system for incorporating folks who do come in late and kind of getting them up to speed, which may not be your responsibility, but maybe you could task that to somebody else in the group. Thanks.
And this is just about the first stage. It seemed like we went to vote, and there were some repetitive items listed that maybe there could have been a step of just grouping them together first, so that the vote was for distinct topics. And then I really liked what Representative Morris recommended. I think it worked well that we stay in our clusters and work through the entire time just with one group.
I like to staying in the group, but I think that what would be helpful is either people go off by 1 by 5 or something, and then you rotate the group so everybody gets a chance. You stay in your group, but that group rotates to the next section, so each person actually gets to stay in their group, but also gets to actually delve into each section as they wish. I also would like to see this have childcare, have food. Like to also see it in more of a community space. Not that the library here isn't a community space, just to be specific, but more like there are places, community rooms in certain neighborhoods. There are certain neighborhoods you can be in or go in to have this. I think that for me, I didn't find out about this event until the day before, like a week ago. And I thought, as one of the people being on the panel, that even though this is an additional sort of subset of that for those people who they're looking to me as a person on the panel, and they're asking me questions about this meeting, and for me, who's in that position, to not be fully informed, which then means the community is not fully informed, is disheartening to me. So I understand that we have timelines, and I understand that's why we do it, and I understand that we have a lack of money, and that's why we don't do things. And I brought this up on the panel, and I'm going to say it again, that let's not do things because of money, and let's make sure that we're really thoughtful in that timeline of being able to engage our communities in the process that needs to happen.
Any last thoughts? Going once? Going twice? Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, we are really grateful. We've been given a huge task. We couldn't do it without you guys, so thank you so much.